Well, one real problem with universal credit is the impact it has on many single-parent families, and single-parent families are clearly disproportionately women who are single parents. And for example, one big problem with universal credit is that the way that childcare support is paid within the system is that you have to pay out your childcare costs when you first put your child into childcare before you can get the money received, which is fine if you've got savings, but for people on a very low income without savings, it means that they may have to get into debt, borrow money in order to make their first childcare payment, simply in order to get the money paid back to them through their universal credit entitlement. It's an absurd situation for people to be in, to get into debt in order to move into work. But for too many people, that will be the reality with universal credit. Young single parents are going to be particularly affected because currently they'd get the higher rate of what's known as personal allowance or standard allowance, which is what we normally think of as job seekers allowance. So they'd normally receive the £73 rate if they're a young single parent, rather than the lower young person's rate of around £57, £58. Under universal credit, that distinction's taken away. So young single parents get the young person's rate of support rather than the older person's rate of support. They lose around £15 a week from the off, simply because they're a young single parent, and measures such as those are disproportionately going to affect women. Some of the recent budget changes to universal credit are unquestionably helpful, reducing the waiting period from the absurd 6 weeks that people have to wait to get, or may have to wait to get their first payment, down to 5, will help to some degree. But that's still an astonishingly long time to be waiting to get your first payment of benefit, particularly if you've been on a low income and have a limited amount of savings. And the solution to in the interim is the idea that people should get a kind of temporary payment in advance, so effectively a loan against their benefit entitlement that they'll have to pay back through the course of the rest of the year. Now, it just seems wrong to me to expect people on a low income claiming benefit for the first time to be getting into debt effectively straight from the off. It should be simple. It should be that people don't have to wait certainly no more than 2 weeks before they can get their first payment of universal credit, so that they don't have to wait forever in order to get some support. And then after that, they shouldn't have to be waiting a month for each additional payment if they don't want to. Some people prefer and find more usual to them to budget on a weekly or fortnightly basis, and those should be options that are just automatically open to people if that's what suits them. But of course, the changes don't solve by any means some of the core structural problems with universal credit. It doesn't one bit help people who are going to be left much worse off as a result of being a disabled person in receipt of universal credit. It doesn't one bit help people who are going to get into debt on their childcare costs as a result of having to pay out before the money's paid back. And of course, it also doesn't solve any of the problems that are just being copied over into universal credit from the current benefit system, such as the benefits freeze, including freezes on support with local housing allowance, or effectively housing support for people who are renting in the private rental sector. All of these problems need to be solved, not just the small tinkering around the edges that we see, welcome as it is, that we saw in the budget.